Well, Donald Trump's second presidency is objectively now a dumpster fire, or a bin fire, as we say in Glasgow. Everything he's touching is turning to merd. It is a disaster. His attempt to undermine those trying to uncover the dirty secrets in the Epstein files have now well and truly catastrophically backfired. Having campaigned for the presidency on the promise of draining the swamp, he is now revealed in emails published today in the United States Congress, which reveal him up to his neck in the filth. No wonder once he got a look at them, once he actually saw what was in them, he about turned and decided that it was all a Democratic Party hoax. And the filthy paedophile, sex trafficker, Ghislaine Maxwell, well, she had to be sent to a federal holiday camp. She had to be given a companion dog. She had to be allowed to sew and have yoga classes all day in a federal penitentiary that would be the equivalent of some of the holidays I used to go on. No wonder he wished her well. No wonder he was worried, as Steve Bannon once revealed to Jeffrey Epstein in black and white today in the email trails. Bannon says to Epstein, "You know, you were the only man I was afraid of in the 2016 election." And Epstein replied, "As well you should have been." Now we know what they were all talking about. Now we know that Epstein to Maxwell says that the dog that hasn't barked is Donald Trump. And yet, says Epstein, he spent hours with redacted victim in my house. A house that Ghislaine Maxwell said Donald Trump never visited. Now, who was that victim? We would have all been none the wiser, except the White House has just confirmed that that victim was Victoria Giuffre. Now, what was he talking to her about for hours? Because he's claiming that he didn't do anything wrong with Virginia Giuffre. That means he was spending hours with her in Jeffrey Epstein's depraved mansion in New York City that he got for $1 from Leslie Wexner, about whom more later. What was he talking to Virginia Giuffre about? I got confused with Victoria because, of course, Wexner is the founder of Victoria's Secrets. In fact, underwear, lingerie, and models loom very large in this filthy scandal. Now, all of it would just be a sex scandal if it were not for the fact that Jeffrey Epstein was a Mossad agent. Would just be an ordinary, if particularly filthy, sex scandal if it were not for the fact that the partner in crime of Jeffrey Epstein was the multiple-time Israeli minister, twice Israeli prime minister, and former head of the Mossad, Ehud Barak. You see, this whole thing was built on the predilections of dirty men in the American political class and journalistic class. Michael Wolff, the biographer of Donald Trump, is now in deep trouble also as a result of the emails released today by the American Congress. He's revealed as the life coach to Jeffrey Epstein after he had been convicted for sex crimes with a minor. He is revealed, Michael Wolff is revealed in these emails to be giving advice to Jeffrey Epstein about how effectively he could blackmail, leverage his knowledge about Donald Trump to his advantage. with a view, presumably, to leniency of the kind later shown to Ghislaine Maxwell. It would ordinarily be just a story about perverts in the political and journalistic class. But because we now know that absolutely, undeniably, irrefutably, Epstein was working for Israel, that opens up, if you like, a new seam, which I now propose to mine. You see, Donald Trump told the audience in Dearborn, Michigan, on the night before polling day, last November, when he won his second presidential term, that he was going to bring peace to Gaza. He was going to stop the catastrophe in Gaza. He was going to stop that war like the other 8, 10, 11 wars that he has subsequently stopped, particularly the one between Albania and Armenia. He said to the audience and to the voters in the state of Michigan at a time when he thought that state was going to be decisive the next day, that he was going to rein in Netanyahu. Of course, once he got in, he preferred to obey the orders of Miriam Adelson and the other pro-Israel donors that had given him hundreds of millions of dollars. His promises to the Michigan audience were soon forgotten. And he then allowed Netanyahu to literally continue committing genocide. He's even written this day to the president of Israel demanding a pardon for Benjamin Netanyahu embroiled in a corruption case in his own country under his own judicial system on White House notepaper with that familiar signature last seen in a birthday card to Jeffrey Epstein, in which he talks about our little secret, and the signature is written where a woman's pubic hair would be. He has been the best friend that Israel has ever had in the White House, as he himself repeatedly boasts. So you've got to ask, are these two things connected? Is the compromise that Epstein had on Trump, which so terrified Steve Bannon, as well it should have, said Epstein, is that connected to the complete volte-face, about turn, not an Anna Baerbock 360 degrees, but definitely a 180. Trump bankrolled, armed, and diplomatically shilled for, vetoed for, over and over again, the mass slaughter of hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza, mainly women and children. And I repeat what I said instinctively right at the beginning of this imbroglio. Trump did not know how exposed he was in the Epstein files until Benjamin Netanyahu told him on that first visit to the White House after Trump's re-election. You know, the one where Trump, like a waiter, pulled out and then pushed in the chair for Netanyahu to sit on. It is an affair that, if you'll forgive the pun, has legs, long, long legs. Like Trump's legs, posing on that bed in a shishi dressing gown, at least 1980s shishi. Trump in the dressing gown, in a portrait which was hung in the New York City mansion of Jeffrey Epstein, where we now know Trump spent hours with Virginia Giuffre discussing, I don't know, peace in the Middle East, the public sector borrowing requirement in Peru, climate change. Who knows what he was discussing for hours with the child sex victim Virginia Giuffre, now departed in very murky and mysterious circumstances indeed. If this was the only issue today, I'd spend my whole 20 minutes talking about it. But there's at least two others. They told you that this joker, Mamdani, a pro-LGBTQ plus vegetarian liberal, woke, fanatic, hippie, was a jihadist. They told you that Mamdani would introduce Sharia law. They told you that this liberal, Mamdani, was a clear and present danger to the United States, that he represented some kind of Islamist revanchism. And the same people that told you that invited to the White House by the back door. At least they had the grace to be embarrassed about it. The man who was the deputy leader of Al-Qaeda before he became the deputy leader of ISIS. The man who, not 1 year ago, when Trump first became president, had a $10 million reward for his arrest in a poster on the website of the U.S. Embassy in Damascus, of the State Department. Yes, that's him. Behind me. Could be dangerous. They were going to give you $10 million not 1 year ago if you could give them information that would lead to his arrest or his killing. And now Donald Trump is spraying Trump perfume about his neck in the Oval Office of the White House, telling us how handsome he is, telling us he's a young man that had a rough past. We've all had a rough past, he said. Well, we now know more about your rough past, Donald Trump. But most of us have never cut people's heads off. Most of us have never cut people's throats. Most of us have never eaten people's hearts, having cut open their chests in order to devour them. Most of us have never been the deputy leader of an organization that decapitated Americans, British, as well as uncountable numbers of Arabs across the Middle East. Most of us have never had that kind of rough past. You hypocrites, not just the political hypocrites, we're used to that. You media hypocrites who haven't even pointed out what I have just said. You hypocrites that interviewed Jolani of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in New York and didn't even press him on his statement on television that when 9/11 happened in that very city, all of us were happy. That's what he said. I'd be lying, he said, if I claimed that when it happened we were not all happy. The journalists, the broadcasters, performed a snow job, practically a blow job, on the deputy leader of ISIS and Al-Qaeda, whilst slandering Mamdani as if he was the ISIS Al-Qaeda guy rather than that idiot. Not the one sitting down, the one standing up, who was given a tour of the Lincoln bedroom. Trump asked him how many wives he had. As he sprayed the perfume, he gave another one. I've never smelt Trump perfume, but I'm I'm going to hazard a guess that it is cheap and trashy, just like what he's done to the ballroom, just like what he's done to the Oval Office itself. Anyway, he hands him a bottle of perfume and says, "That's for your wife. How many wives have you got?" Giuliani says, "Just one." Trump says, "I never know with you guys." Giuliani could have countered, "How come you're so against immigrants when you married two of them? One of them on a visa as a model, and have had children with both of them. What have you got against immigrants? Is it only the ones with the nice cheekbones that you want to keep in the United States?" It was a Benny Hill farce conducted by a president of the United States of America that is roaming around the world, threatening wars, making wars, sanctioning, tariffing, throwing his weight around like a bull in a china shop. Although a bull has rather bigger hands, if you get my drift. This man is a clear and present danger to the Republic. Yes, that's their business. He's a clear and present danger to the world. That is our business. Now, I've only got time to deal with one other issue, but it's so hilarious, I can't pass up the opportunity. I told you here months ago that Keir Starmer will be lucky to be Prime Minister by Christmas, and he will definitely not be Prime Minister the day after the next local elections and the elections to the Scottish Parliament and the Welsh Assembly. Well, it looks like I'm turning out to have predicted correctly again. Call me Nostradamus. I knew that this robot would take Labour to its lowest ever ebb since the day and hour that it was founded, and he has. This Prime Minister, just over a year in office, has lost half of all the people who voted for him in July of last year. This Prime Minister, whose country is visibly, is discernibly, you can smell the decline in this country. You can smell the despair amongst the population. Britain feels like today what it felt like in the depth of the COVID crisis, when we were locked down, wearing masks, crossing the road to avoid each other, when you couldn't hug your granny or attend the funeral of your late father. That's what Britain is like today, under him, Starmer, the man who nonetheless is shelling out billions to little Zelensky, the crook, who the Spectator magazine on its front page has just declared is about to fall as a result of myriad corruption scandals involving hundreds of millions of dollars, euros, and pounds. Anyway, I even gave you the name of his challenger, a little runt called Wesley Streeting, and he is as he sounds. He's the Blair man. Boy, really. He's been groomed, if you'll forgive the pun, by Peter Mandelson and Tony Blair for years to be the next Labour leader. And he's begun to make his move. Sufficiently, obviously, that Starmer briefed the British media that this Streeting was a traitor to the cause and was plotting to overthrow him. Starmer's people say, well, we were trying to smoke him out. But in fact, they've merely set fire to the prime ministership of Keir Starmer himself, because the response in the country to the possibility that Starmer might be deposed was hallelujah, and nation rejoices. We don't care how bad Streeting is. We'll take anybody other than Keir Starmer. As Oscar Wilde said on the death scene in Charles Dickens' Little Nell, you'd have to have a heart of stone not to laugh. Stay tuned. I'll be right back.